my generation, or the people that I hung out with, we were all, sort of Warhol fans. We were like big fans because he made art that was sort of alienating to most people and the art world, and represented something really new. And so we all wanted to go to Godard films and Andy Warhol films and listen to the Rolling Stones and be rebellious. So I wanted to be a filmmaker, so I went to the graduate film program at Columbia University. And I was studying, I had a teacher for criticism, and who was a famous film critic, Andrew Saris. So he let me write for the Village Voice, and my friend Bob Colacello, who also a student there. And so we were kind of the junior writers, and we wrote about things that were too crazy for the other film critics. Like I wrote about El Topo and John Waters, and Bob wrote about Warhol, and that got the attention of the factory because Andy had started Interview a little bit less than a year earlier. Why an artist would start a newspaper, I don't know, but there were a couple of theories. One was Andy would say, "Oh, I did it to give the kids something to do." And then other people said, "Oh, he did it to get free tickets to the New York Film Festival," which was probably more likely the case. And, it wasn't like the biggest magazine in the world or anything, but it did sort of introduce the question and answer format to magazines on a bigger scale, because up to that point, it was really only, there was the Playboy interview, which was, with famous people, and it was conducted over several days, many hours that were like edited and condensed into this, very polished profile. And maybe Rolling Stone would run an interview once in a while, but we kind of were the ones that really used it as a replacement for writing. And it was a good time to replace writing because everybody was so pretentious and long-winded. And I felt like we were producing something that was, if somebody was being pretentious, the other person would say, you're being ridiculous. So I don't know, I always liked this sort of dialogue format, sort of platonic, questioning of things. And also I like the fact that our interviews were not polished like the Playboy interview. They were very kind of fly on the wall, giving people, like a real conversation, where you talk about, what you had for lunch and, where do you get really good shoes in New York or whatever.
Like actually giving the reader the idea of being in the room with
what
whoever.
people really talk about. Yeah.
Like the whole kind of Warholian wisdom. What did you learn, and what do you think like a young film student should really, what would you pass on in terms of Warhol's wisdom to a young filmmaker?
Well, I think in film, what he was doing was really sort of reinventing the history of film. It wasn't like he picked up from, Howard Hawks and moved on. It was like he sort of went back to Lumiere, and he started out like shooting the Empire State Building, and then somebody sleeping and somebody eating. And part of it was learning the process and the technology, and let's figure out how to work this microphone and work this camera, and let's figure out how to move the camera. Because like for many, many films, the camera didn't move or anything, and there wasn't really acting. But I thought once it really got going, it was very fresh because the flaws made you always, you weren't seduced into this dreamlike state the way you are in a Hollywood film, with Technicolor and, incredible sound. It was like, warts and all. And so I think there was this kind of new realism about it. And also, it wasn't the traditional idea of movie stars. They were all kind of extreme personalities. They were people that nobody would ever put in a movie except for Andy, I guess. But Jean was different because he was kind of the first graffiti artist to do content. It wasn't just him signing his name. He made these poems. And he wasn't working on the subways. He was mostly doing it in Soho and in the gallery neighborhoods. So it was pretty clear what his intention was from the beginning. So that's why he's cast as an artist. He actually, at this point, hadn't really had money. I think we bought him his first real canvas, at this time.
And you hired him to do to illustrate your column, right?
I did once, yeah, because he always was bugging me to meet Andy Warhol, and so I got him to do an illustration for my column in an interview, and so I said, okay, I'll take you up, I'll introduce you to Andy, who we had actually sold, I think, a postcard or two on the street at one point. And so I took him up, and Andy looked at him, and not too many people with dreadlocks hung out there, so he said, oh, is it okay? Is it safe? And I said, yeah, he's fine. And then, like a year and a half later, they were really, really tight, so.
I mean, when you see these, like, what downtown looked like at the time, it says in the movie, it's a war zone. And when you look at the Brandhorst Museum, some of the art seems incredibly political, but Warhol wasn't political.
Well, not intentionally, but I think that his. I had this discussion with John Giorno, who was here for this event and who was in Andy's film sleeping for 6 hours. And I said, now, we're living at another time where there's a lot of, crises in the world and a lot going on politically, but the art world isn't connected to that culturally the way it used to be. And I said that Andy, who everybody thought was kind of, politically out of it, now looks like a political artist because, I mean, he did the Most Wanted Men, he did the electric chairs, the race riots. So, his work looks really strong. The hammer and sickle, the skulls. But John said, yeah, but he was just trying to be shocking and do subject matter that nobody else would touch. And so, I guess he was political without realizing it. And this film actually it was kind of a shipwreck. It was kind of a sunken ship that was floated because the company that paid for it actually got into political trouble. It was an Italian company, Rizzoli, which is now a big publisher, but at that time they were the biggest entertainment company in Italy. And so the film was shot in the winter of '80-'81, and it premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 2000. When the film came out, somebody wanted to do an article in New York, and they said, let's go look at the locations where you shot the film. And we couldn't find them. I mean, because the city had transformed so much. And then you realize that, in a way, artists are the shock troops of real estate. We went in there and made it safe for the rich people.
It's what happens in Brooklyn now.
Yeah. No, it's happened to the whole city. People are wondering if the Bronx will be next. It's the last refuge of the middle class.
You then went on to produce and present an incredibly legendary TV show called Glenn O'Brien's TV Party, which in many ways was political and...
It was political, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was when cable TV first came to New York. Cable at that point was really only for better reception. Because of all the tall buildings in New York, you couldn't really get a good picture on your TV. So when they wired the city, some sort of what would now be thought of as a, communist, said that the people need to have access to this technology, so they invented public access TV, so anyone could have a show. And so there was really only the main channels, the networks, and then there were a few public access channels. But what it meant was that if you're watching TV and just flipping through the dial, the roulette of it, gave you about a 1 in 12 chance of stumbling across your show. And I had been invited to this sort of political show, this funky political show, and the next day I got on the subway and somebody said, "I saw you on TV last night." And I thought, wow, somebody was actually watching that. And then it happened again and again. And I called up my best friend, Chris Stein, who was the guitar player in Blondie, and somebody who did lay in bed all night smoking pot and watching public access TV. And I said, we have to get a show. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So we started TV Party, and the idea was it was the TV show that's a cocktail party, but which could be a political party. And we had this kind of crazy platform of seceding from New York. The city seceding from the state. And we were for basically what happened to the Soviet Union, long before. We believed in political devolution of breaking up into the smallest units possible. And it was kind of fantasy, but it was actually what I really believed in.
And you pretty much broke with every single rule there's in television, no?
The most shocking thing on television or radio is what they call dead air. And that's when, you're watching television and the person is like, and then, and it drives people crazy because they're so programmed by television. And so we did everything we could to be sort of disturbing, I guess, and entertaining at the same time. We were kind of multidisciplinary, I guess. People didn't specialize so much the way they do today because we had this sort of mentality. I don't know if you have in Germany or if you know the Little Rascals, but the Little Rascals was an old Hollywood series of film shorts about kids who were from the age of 8 to 12 or something. And the whole spirit of the Little Rascals was, hey, let's put on a show. And I think that what made what we now call punk or new wave interesting was that these are a lot of, we were so far away from being discovered by the mainstream. If you wanted it to get signed by Atlantic Records or RCA Records, New York was not the place for you, because it was considered too weird and too dirty or too ambiguous sexually or whatever. So I think basically the new wave was 500 people trying to entertain each other and becoming stars in a really small community. And if you went to CBGB's, the entire audience was composed of people in other bands, which is kind of great, I think.
What role in this sort of group of 500, what was the role of Andy Warhol in all of that?
I guess he was the Pope.
And everybody else were monks?
And I was Johnny Carson, I guess.
Thank you.